Hey everyone, and welcome to The Rational Republican, a podcast where we look at complex issues facing us here in Oregon and around the nation. We'll try to address issues from a nonpartisan perspective and view our disagreements through a lens of respect rather than tribalism or divisiveness. I'm James Ball. This is Nick Perlasky.
Hey listeners, how we doing?
Today's podcast is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors. ProLift is your one-stop shop for residential and small commercial garage doors, from openers, springs, and rollers to full reinstalls. They offer same-day service on all garage door repairs with no extra charge for evenings or weekends. Serving the greater Portland metro area, call today and set up your free estimate at 503-558-6349 or at proliftdoors.com/Portland. Again, that's 503-558-6349 or proliftdoors.com/Portland. That guy. Start recording here. On this episode of the podcast, we are delighted to welcome Mayor Stan Pulliam, the mayor of wonderful Sandy, Oregon. And so we're meeting here from Stan's house out in Sandy. So Stan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome to my home.
Yeah.
Good to have you.
Thank you for having us. So you've been in the national news lately for both the New Year's Day reopening, as well as you were recently interviewed by Willamette Week for talking with Commissioner, what was her name?
Commissioner Sushila Jayapal.
Okay. Yep. I was going to mess that up.
Well, I practiced it a couple times.
So you've been in the news lately. So do you want to just give us a little bit of background about why you've been in the news lately and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so, I mean, at this point, we're talking a month back, shortly after the second shutdown of our local Main Street small businesses. I had several. My phone just started ringing off the hook. And then eventually I received a text message from a local small business owner, a restaurant owner, who said, Mayor, would you come and meet with me at my business at 3 o'clock? And so I did, and as I walked through the doors, here I found just about every local Main Street small business owner sitting there in her restaurant wanting an audience with their mayor. And so I spoke to them, and what they indicated was they said, Mayor, we're ready to open. And I don't talk too much about this, but they were ready to open that Sunday. So we're talking, it's like Wednesday, and they're ready to go. And when you're mayor of a community that's your hometown, like Sandy is for me, you feel this enormous weight on your shoulders of responsibility. And so that day was no different. I talked through, what we as a city control, and then probably more importantly, like what we don't actually have power over. We just recently had a city council meeting where we talked to our police chief, and they were taking an educational approach. And so they didn't really have a lot from our local police department to worry about. They also didn't need to worry about our local Sandy licenses. Quite frankly, it's more of a revenue generator, like a lot of those than anything. And so they weren't looking to lose that.
Spoiler alert, the revenue generates the other levels too.
Right. No, I didn't institute that business license. So I'll be clear about that. But the important things, as I said earlier, were what we don't have control over, right? Which is the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, OSHA, Oregon Lottery Commission, and that's all under the governor's purview. And so making sure that there was understanding of really the risk of that. And they pretty much said, well, shoot, Mayor, we're still ready to open. What should we do? And my recommendation at that time was I couldn't, if I was them, consider opening against the mandate, knowing the ramifications that can come down. Like I mentioned to him, I think we had 12 businesses. And that, for Mayor Sandy, that was very impressive. But at the end of the day, that's a Wednesday, right, for the governor. Right. She can come down on them tremendously hard. So as I told him, I said, the only way I would do that if I was in your position is under some kind of mass opening. A together we stay, united we stand, divided we fall kind of a scenario.
Sure.
And they said, well, we have another meeting over in Fairview at 5 o'clock. Will you go to that? I said, all right, fine. So I walk in, and it's like 3 times the crowd. And these folks are ready to open. And now there's surrounding communities of Gresham and Troutdale and Wood Village and everywhere. And from there, it really it started to snowball. It started to grow on itself. I was invited to a similar event over in Tigard that following Sunday. Had several hundred people there from businesses all over the west side. And that's where the New Year's Day really started to come from, is we started talking about, all right, so what's a day that we can kind of target that's recognizable. Everybody knows New Year's Day. A lot of jokes about 2020, right? And the ability to put 2020 behind us and start the year anew. And really, it was that day that really kind of started getting out there, an idea for New Year's Day. As I continued that following week, we had those same kind of business coalition meetings, and I was getting the feeling that we were going to open. And sorry to kind of, be long of breath on this, but
no, it's fine.
At that point, they were saying, all right, we're opening, we're looking at January 1, and we started getting in all kinds of back and forth as to what that would look like. Some people wanted to open with no masks, no social distancing. They were over COVID, right? Others wanted the exact opposite. They wanted to open, but very safe. And I came home that evening, and I talked to my wife, Mackenzie, and I feel a sense of responsibility, and like this movement really had a leadership moment in front of it. That people were opening. Some were opening previous to New Year's Day because they just didn't even have the time to wait that long. Some were going to open the days after, but everyone was opening under different criteria. And COVID is real. I'm one that believes that COVID is real, and I believe that we should do what we can as people, using personal responsibility, to do what we can to prevent the spread of COVID. So it was then that I really sat down and started writing my open letter to the governor that set forth what a New Year's Day open would look like. And with that, we talked about, just going one level under what the governor had. So in these counties that she has designated extreme, we would open high. So we would have face masks, social distancing, sanitation. And I really felt that was an important moment for the movement, because now today we have several businesses open. We've got a lot of restaurants and pubs. We have fitness centers that are open. And when I go and visit these, I take great pride in the fact that I see people wearing face masks and social distancing and doing the proper sanitation. And people ask me, they say, Mayor, deaths are on your watch, on COVID. And where I push back is I say, one is what would it have looked like if I hadn't been part of the movement and pushed for, the face masks and all the safety measures. And then on top of that is, these businesses, where's the evidence? Where's the scientific proof that they are contributing, that more so to the spread of COVID-19 than the big box stores in corporate America? Especially when you think about when all this was going on was during the holidays. People would go to the mall and to these big box stores and pack in doing their Christmas shopping, yet they couldn't support a local mom and pop small business. And probably even more tragic than that were those business owners. It was the employees who were now out of a job, was struggling to get their unemployment. The amount of money that they were able to get wasn't meeting what they were used to really bringing home after tips and everything else. And here they were going into the holiday season. So imagine what it feels like to be one of these employees who's out of job, have your family at home. You're not able to provide for them, during the holidays. And yet you see everybody else packing in to big box stores to do their shopping. So that's what it was all about for us, was supporting these local mom and pop businesses and their employees as well.
Well, and everybody's trying to get away from, Jeff Bezos, billionaire, evil overlord, and all these kind of things, think local, shop local, all these kind of things. And now we don't even have the opportunity to do that. We're still going into Home Depots, we're still going into Walmarts, but like you say, the mom and pop shops. And I guess I'd be curious for your thoughts on this as well. Just today, Gavin Newsom in California rescinded the stay-at-home orders. And I'm wondering if you feel any kind of, vindication may not be the right word, but kind of maybe any feeling of, hey, yeah, the science was on our side. We are able to do this and take precautions. Viewers can see, listeners can probably hear. I'm wearing a mask right now. My wife asked me to. We're seeing her parents later this week, and I made that personal decision. Sure. I don't want to get murdered, but I made that decision on my own. And I'm just wondering if you kind of feel any, I guess, vindication in saying, we can do this safely, and we can do this and continue to support our community members.
Well, I absolutely do, especially with some of the national media appearances that we were getting. I think talking a lot about the double standards, especially in regards to COVID-19 and these shutdowns, really had an impact. It was shortly after that Governor Cuomo in New York came out and said, we need to open up these local small businesses. Shortly after him, we had Mayor Littlefield of Chicago saying that we needed to reopen these local Main Street businesses. And then, of course, you mentioned, what just recently happened at a state next door. So yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things I asked Commissioner Susila in the back and forth with Willamette Week is hey, why don't you join on to these other members from the left and wanting to open up these businesses? We would love to have a Multnomah County Commissioner join on the cause.
Lori Lightfoot, Andrew Cuomo, pretty good Democrats. It's they're not Trumpy MAGA Republicans, whatever.
Well, and I keep hearing from Democrats is that we want to be the party of the working class, of working families, and so when push comes to shove right now for the working class and working families, where are you?
Yeah. Well, I think that just shows exactly how far the left has abandoned the working class. The thing that irritates me the most about COVID is just you're using exactly one metric to decide whether or not we are fighting COVID well enough or whatever, and that is the number of cases or the number of deaths. I guess that's two metrics, but basically the same thing. They are not considering things like the achievement gap and kids in schools many low-income kids of color who have not been to school in a year, who are now a year behind their peers. Like, we're not even talking about that. We're not talking about the small businesses that are going out of business. We're not talking about the employees that you're referring to. And like, those need to be part of the calculus. You need to say, this is how many people are catching the disease, this is how many people are dying, and also here are the other things that are being impacted by the government action. And I think what you did and what we should be doing as a state and as a nation is saying we can relax some of these restrictions based on science or lack of science and still prevent people from catching COVID. I think that what we've discovered now is that is a pretty good way to avoid getting COVID. It's wear a mask and socially distance. Like, that's it. And so if you can do those two things, the rest of it is extra. And it just it irritates me to no end that we're forcing, just to your point, we're forcing these businesses. We're eating outside. I went to dinner the other night with my wife in downtown Portland, and there was a tent outside, and they had put down a floor, and they had heat lamps, and they had tables and waiters, and it was, for all intents and purposes, indoors, but it was in a tent, and therefore it was allowed. But at the same time, the gyms and fitness centers are shut down, but Best Buy is wide open, and it's just the inconsistency across the board is so frustrating, and it's not based on any science. It's based entirely on politics, and that's the thing that irritates me. Kate Brown will lie through her teeth when she says this is all based on science, because there's no science justifying any of this. It's all based on politics. It's all based on what she thinks is going to make her supporters happy. This is why teachers are getting vaccines before elderly.
That's right.
The elderly are dying at 20 a day. How many teachers are dying? With apologies to Madeline.
She's not dead. She's not dead. Unless something bad happened in the last hour.
But seniors are dying at an alarming rate. And why are we not vaccinating them? Instead, we're vaccinating teachers.
No, that's right. And it's a couple of things you said there. One is NFIB has said that we're going to lose 25% of businesses along our main streets over the next couple of months. And think about the ramifications of that. These local Main Street small businesses are the heartbeat of our communities like Sandy, all throughout the state. We just had
small businesses make up something like 60% of the economy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that.
Yeah. Well, and you think about the year we've gone through, this global pandemic, unprecedented wildfires. As a mayor of a small community like Sandy, every time we need a food relief center or something to give back to the community, it's those local Main Street small businesses that we turn to. I mean, they truly are the lifeblood. And you tapped in a little bit into the ramifications of this. A lot of people talk about the current trends, but very few talk about our future. In fact, in my phone conversation with the governor, she said, what do you want to be like Idaho? And I pushed back and I said, well, I certainly want Idaho's future. I want a vibrant Main Street, communities throughout the state. I want our children in school and receiving the education they need. Now think about this. So Oregon was 47th out of 50 in graduation rates pre-COVID-19 and the lockdowns. We were 43rd out of 50 in education pre-COVID-19 and the lockdown. So now, we're one of the few states that have these full shutdowns of virtual learning. You've got to imagine the ramifications of that. But then you started to talk about this, James, is the huge inequities. So here in Sandy, we're lucky because, as you mentioned, we're on SandyNet. That's what we're utilizing right now. Is we have our own. We'll talk about this a little later, I'm sure, but we have our own broadband, high-speed internet service. So people here in Sandy have been able to work from home. Their children have been able to do virtual learning. But a lot of communities aren't as lucky as Sandy, especially throughout all of rural Oregon and the suburbs. They don't have that same access to internet that our community is able to, and especially the larger cities like Portland, Eugene, and Bend. And so you think about the kids in these rural communities, their access to virtual learning and what that environment's been like for them. But then you think beyond that. So I hear all the time of parents having these learning pods where they're bringing in tutors, and you've got to be able to afford a tutor, quite honestly, to bring them in. And so the inequities are just continuing to grow and grow and grow. And I wonder why it is conservatives that are continually having to point out these inequities, that are going on right now. And it's never the left that's doing it.
This has to do with a larger populist movement, I think, in the Republican Party that, not a huge Trump fan, but something that he kind of tapped into was this: we are the party of the working man and the working woman. And the Democratic Party has just totally left these people out on their own.
Yeah.
And I think that this is probably an opportunity for the Republican Party is to reach out to these people. And I mean, you go back to your Willamette Week discussion and just the arrogance and the elitism of the left and how they know what's best. And, I was having these discussions on Facebook with some of my liberal friends who cannot wrap their minds around the fact that 75 million people voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Like, that is not a small fringe movement. That's half the country, and so the discussion was around white nationalism, and basically her point was, Trump says all these things and none of, for all 75 million of these people, that was not enough that was not a deterrent for them voting for him. Yeah. It's like, but you have to look at it the other way around. Why did they vote for him? If this, how can you vote for someone who is so appalling in so many ways? This is me speaking, my own rhino-ness coming out a little bit. How can you vote for someone so appalling and has so many terrible things? What does that say about the Democratic Party? Right. That they are not able to capture all those voters. What does it say about the party of the elite that these people aren't just flocking to the Democrats? They almost lost the election.
Yeah, they did.
Almost lost the election.
They did.
And they were running against Donald Trump. I mean, let that sink in for a minute.
Right.
You're running against Donald Trump and you almost lost.
Right. Well, a lot of it's tribalism. A lot of it is us not venturing outside of kind of our own communities and where we live, and we get involved in just kind of this group think, But what a lot of people don't talk about is now President Trump obviously did very poorly in Oregon. He only got around 39% of the vote. But 42% of his total vote in Oregon came in the Portland metro area. And so while we walk around and we think, this is the most liberal part of the state, it certainly is per capita. This is where all the people are. And so think about that for a second. Nearly half of Trump's vote in the state of Oregon came from the Portland metro area. And so there is a little bit of some, I think, waking up that people need to do to realize is that the people who are conservative or think differently than you, they're in your community, right? And a lot of them are your neighbors. And we need to be talking to each other about these differences because that's really the only way we're going to come together and heal as a country, quite frankly.
I did appreciate that, that's what Willie Week, I think, was trying to do. We can, to argue about how, to what extent, because I thought you, in that interview, made a lot of really good points that I do not think necessarily were addressed by the Multnomah County Commissioner, but we can have the discussion another time. But moving from Trump back here to Oregon, we're also we Republicans are in a pretty deep minority. We did pick up, I think, 2 seats in the state house and net 2 seats in the state Senate and one in the state house.
Net 1 in the House
Sherry Helt
and flat in the Senate. Net 1 in the House, flat in the Senate.
Net 1 in the House, flat in the Senate. There it is. So, it's still pretty bad news out there for Republicans. There's a lot of Democrats that are elected to various parts of the state here, and we clearly see the state going in the wrong direction. We as Republicans, and James and I on this podcast, love to throw haymakers at Kate Brown for this failure and that failure, and we could go on and on. But it's all up and down the Democratic board. There's bad leadership, bad policies, and nothing ever gets challenged. What do you see as kind of the best way forward from that? What do you see as the best way to kind of get Oregon back to, its natural Oregony-ness, good economy, good jobs, tolerant of a lot of people, everything.
Yeah. One is just to get back to common sense policies and common sense proposals. And I'll speak to that a little bit. But the one thing I would point out is just what you said, which is we got to point out that we got here. How did we get here? One of the points going back and forth in the Willamette Week captured some of it, but not as much as they should have, is there was a right direction, wrong direction question that was asked. And the commissioner, really laid out a lot of things that are going very wrong, here in Oregon, from our homelessness issues to education, just a variety of different issues. And of course, you mentioned the Senate walkout and different things as well. And, my follow-up to that is I hope that readers take notice, because what we see here is one of the elected leaders of the left admitting that we are going in the wrong direction. And to your point, Nick, is that for the last 3 decades, we've had only Democrat control of the governor's office. Mm-hmm. For the vast majority of the last 3 decades, we've only had Democrat control of the state legislature. We certainly had left-wing control of the city commissioner's offices in Portland, county commissioner offices in Portland. And so here we are, right? After 3 decades, we lead the way in homelessness and mental health issues. We're last place in education and others. And so how do we get back from that? And I think one is, as I said, highlighting just who got us here. And, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting to have a different result. But the other is just not being out there ourselves and to offer an alternative vision to the major issues facing our state. One of them being just recently in COVID, right? And the proposal that I put forward on businesses opening. We didn't just say open to our conversation earlier. We said this is the manner in which you should open, right? Mm-hmm. And showing that kind of leadership. And I think when you get to education and homelessness issues and a variety, it's up to us, though. We have to offer an alternative vision for Oregonians to consider and to possibly vote for. Because right now, just on our side, I think back to the last 3 decades and our campaign efforts and our candidates. I have a hard time when I go back and I think of individual names like ran for governor, for example. What did they stand for? What were their proposals? What was going to be like the big impact that they were going to make for our state? And I don't know about you, but I have a hard time thinking of those things. And so if it's me, it's someone who's plugged in to this process pretty good and pays a lot of attention. If I struggle to, I can't imagine what our neighbors, what they would think of. So we've got to do that. We got to be articulate. We got to be bold. We got to be bold about our proposals, because that's what people expect out of people right now in their elected leaders, and they demand results. And I think that's a lot of what President Trump's success was, over the last several years as well, was being results-driven leadership. Even his biggest detractors, I think, appreciated that about him.
One of the things that I think is frustrating to me about the Republican Party now is what does get news is that statement that the ORP came out with just a few days ago about condemning the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump and talking about a false flag attack on the Capitol and just, oh my gosh, the leadership needs to tone it down a little bit. And we talked about this if anybody listens to the Ali and Pissarro show, I've been on there a lot lately, and kind of Alan made a really interesting point.
You got to go on their show and plug our show. You can't use our show.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Priorities.
We do that frequently. You clearly don't listen to the show because that happens frequently. No, Alan made a really good point that it's kind of the point that I made earlier. If 75 million people voted for Trump, why did they vote for Trump? And you kind of show that here in Oregon of there are good people in the Republican Party. Why are they mad? Why is this such an issue for them where the leadership feels like they need to come out with such an inflammatory statement? And I think that what I want from my party leadership is a bit more discretion when it comes to that kind of thing. I don't think that was a good call on their part to post that, but it shines a light on some of the issues that are going on within our party and within just kind of the grassroots. But that's what people remember. They don't remember what Bueller stood for, and Nick probably knows because he was worked on the campaign. But what they'll remember is that the ORP put out a statement and called the attack on the Capitol a false flag attack.
Sure.
And so, it's both sides. I think we need to have a bold vision and also just tone it down on some of the other things. There's no need to even say that. Just just be silent on the issue.
And there's not a lot I can disagree with there, James. But one thing I like to remind people is the Oregon Republican Party is a fully volunteer-ran organization. And so what we end up with is a lot of us, me included, we'll take umbrage with something that they said or they did, but we're not volunteering our time, in changing the course of the Oregon Republican Party. And that's not to say, James, and I know you certainly have gone to a lot of party events, so you've certainly volunteered your time. But but again, people need to roll up their sleeves and get involved in these things if they want to, see a difference. And that is one thing I would say to people, kind of in our party, in the Republican Party in Oregon is the Oregon Republican Party does need our attention. It does need, and people within the party, I think, would say they need a breath of kind of fresh air and some new leadership. I was happy to see in Clackamas County a lot of the delegates that were sent were first-time delegates, former young Republicans and young people getting involved. So I think that's good. But yeah, I think we need to get involved and try to change things that we don't like. But another part to your point, and I don't know if it's necessarily the ORP, but we need to call a spade, and we have an extremism problem in this state, in this country, quite frankly. Especially in the wake of the events in Washington D.C., we have an extreme right and we have an extreme left that I think we as citizens need to come together and really talk about and have a conversation about. But what doesn't help is when we try to engage in these thoughtful conversations, like I tried to this last week with the Willamette Week, and we take the leadership to say, hey, we've got a problem here. We've got a problem on the extreme right. We got a problem on the extreme left. And yet there's a total blind side to what's going on the left. And to me, that's tragic, right? Because as leaders, if we can't step up and say, let's not vandalize storefronts.
Right.
Let's be against violence.
Novel concept.
Like just normal stuff, right? Or don't raid the U.S. Capitol. We should be able to do those things, and more importantly, people from both sides should be able to stand up in solidarity.
Instead, we've got
things.
Ted Wheeler going down and marching with the protesters and getting tear gassed.
Right.
Like, dude, you're the mayor.
Well, and how was he rewarded for that? He was, I think it was a couple of weeks ago that he was punched in the face.
Yeah.
When trying to dine out.
Sit out at a restaurant. Yeah.
Sit out at a restaurant, which I condemned in the biggest, terms. Is no public official, elected person should go out with their family or anyone and worry about being punched in the face from someone that disagrees with them, right? Yep. And this came from the left, but they've been emboldened, and not just the left. I'm talking the extremes have been emboldened, to stand up and act this way. And the reason they are emboldened is because leaders from the left, they embolden the extreme left, and leaders from the right embolden members of the extreme right. And we've got to be able to stand up and say, what, right and wrong. Right and wrong. This is what we're going to stand against.
Totally agree.
So I'd be curious for your thoughts. We in 2018, obviously Newt Buehler won the primary and was the Republican nominee for governor, and he was almost a victim of the stars aligning. He had run for statewide office before. He had passed a lot of good legislation while he was a state rep from Bend, and he had more money than God. He had all the Phil Knight money and everything like that.
But not as much as Kate Brown.
No, well, actually,
still got outspent by Kate Brown.
No, I know Newt had more than Kate Brown. We had, I think, like $19 million. She had like 16 or 17.
She spent 40. She spent $40 million.
We'll have to go look at the Orstar report.
Well, there's Orstar, and then there's all the third-party stuff.
And that's true too. That's a very fair point.
Well, this is something I've been talking with Alan.
Well, but I want to ask real quick.
Okay.
What we don't have that. We are the last person to run for statewide office was Joe Ray Perkins, who nobody's going to elect to anything. Joe, sorry if you're listening. I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. We don't have real. I hate to say, but competent leadership structure at the party level. This is the things that they get the news for, is putting out statements about Republican Congress representatives who aren't even from Oregon. What should we as Republicans be looking forward to? And I agree with what you say. More people need to step up, volunteer as PCPs, get involved in Chamber of Commerce, a lot of different things at the, at entry levels. But what do we need to be looking for as we start to evaluate who's going to run for CD6, who's going to run for Senate the next couple of times around, who's going to run for governor in the future, and really be the standard bearer for Oregon Republicans?
Well, I think one is you've got to look for people who can relate. You go back to the old adage, someone that you want to have a beer with. Right? That's
Sure.
always a candidate that has some sort of an advantage, or at least that's what I hear. And you think about for the last, I think it's 4 decades, I can't think of anyone who has had children in public elementary school living in the governor's mansion. And you wonder why we are ranking last in almost every educational category when no one has a day-to-day experience to have their kids in public school, like in real time, right? Now, Dr. Bueller, right, was pretty well off. Dr. Bud Pierce was pretty well off. I think after years in the NBA, Chris Dudley was pretty well off. And so what I would say is what is there to relate to with these individuals? What is it that middle-class families that have 2 working parents who have kids in school that are trying to balance that now with virtual learning, right, and everything else. What is it about those individuals that we're relating to? How much college debt are those folks paying off? Have they paid off their mortgage yet? Or are they just still, paying it down now? Or are they now working on their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th home? And what is relatable on that? And so what I think we need to be looking for is, and again, I don't like spending so much time talking about President Trump, but he was somehow like the richest, most unrelatable, relatable person, like in the history of politics. But that's what I think we've got to be looking for. We've got to be looking for authentic, straightforward candidates that kind of say it how it is, but probably more important than anything, are relatable. They're relatable. The challenges that they're facing are the same challenges that you and I and our neighbors are facing, and can speak to those and are thinking through it. And that, to me, is probably the most important item.
Okay. I think that's also one of the reasons why we've had such a struggle with COVID, is that we've got Kate Brown and all of her people who have not experienced real life at all. She graduated from law school. A year later, she was elected to the state legislature, and she's been a public elected official since she was 27 years old.
That's right.
She has no experience outside of running government. So, yeah, she's not going to prioritize small business. She has no idea what it's like to own a small business. She's not going to prioritize education, at least not in the right ways, because she just doesn't have that experience. So I think that, we talk about career politicians a lot on the right, and that's kind of the problem, is when you spend your entire life, no offense to President Biden, but he's another one of those guys who has no experience outside of public life. And okay, maybe he's great at the bureaucracy. Maybe Kate's probably a great bureaucrat, but she has no experience with what her constituents are going through. So she's got a D by her name, so.
Well, and this isn't the most popular thing to say, and I'll probably call you afterwards and ask you to edit this or something. Who knows? But, to your point, I think a big problem is compensation in the Oregon State Legislature. We compensate our state legislators to such a small degree that it really leaves 2 categories of people that are able to look to get in there, at least from what I perceive to be kind of the center-right. And that is, extremely wealthy, kind of retired business people who were very relatable and could relate at one time, but have kind of moved on with their lives to something that we should all strive for. I mean, God bless them. Right. That's, it's the American way, it's the American dream. But they're now beyond, and they can afford to now be a state legislator. Or it's someone that's extremely young, can live off of that, salary, doesn't have a family that they're trying to support or a mortgage. And my argument there would be is do you want that person representing you that doesn't know what it is to have a mortgage and to have, all these life experience? And so what that leaves is I think we have a hard time finding really quality candidates that are relatable from the right. And then what we end up with on the other side is a plethora of candidates, because a lot of them come from the public sector or law firms that have careers and jobs that allow them to do this at different stages of life. And it's a really hard environment to fight back against. But, Oregonians deserve, people from both parties that are at different segments of their life representing them. And the only real way to address that right now, I think, is to take a hard look at compensation in the state legislature. That won't be a popular move.
Honestly, 100%,
I'm with you.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. That's definitely, the truth is there for a lot of different things, but you get what you pay for. And if you're only willing to pay somebody whatever a legislator makes, $20,000 or $25,000 a year.
I think it's up to 30 now, but yeah,
30. There you go.
30,000 a year for legislators.
You're going to get $30,000 a year worth of legislative expertise.
And they say, sorry to interrupt, but they say like, it should just be a part-time gig anyways. But when you're meeting every single year, and at some point months on end for a year, I mean, good luck finding an employer,
right?
That's not from the public sector that's going to be all in on something like that.
Not to mention,
6 months off.
We talked to Suzanne Weber last time, and her race between the two candidates was over $3 million. You're spending $3 million trying to win a race that you would get $30K a year for.
Right.
Like, holy crap. But it's insane. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. But I mean, that's one of the reasons that I quit my job at Intel and started ProLift was I knew that if I want to have a life in public service, I'm not going to get paid for it.
Right.
I need something that is going to, because Intel is actually pretty flexible, and they may have been like, you know what, you can take 6 months off to go legislate, but I didn't want to bet on it.
Right.
And more than likely, what they would have had me do is, legislate from 9 to 7, and then do Intel emails from 7 to 9 or 10 or 11. And I wasn't really willing to do that either. So
right. Well, and so think about what we just talked about. All these families that have dual working, dual husband and wife, or husband, wife, but dual people working out of the same household and juggling all these things. Now imagine that you had to look at your partner and say, okay, so now I'm going to go take on a job that pays half.
Yeah.
Tough to do.
Or a third or a quarter, depending on where you're coming from.
Right.
But yeah, so
eating a lot of ramen.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that's definitely a way that we can help. But yeah, the left doesn't seem to have that problem because you know what? Central City Concern wants to send one of their admin people to go hang out at the legislature for 6 months. They get all sorts of positive benefits from the legislature. They're all about that. Whereas
we had Shelley Bossart Davis on an episode several months ago, and she was telling us about how she shoehorned us in from 3 to 4 one afternoon, and had legislative business for the next couple hours, and then had her trucking business or a couple of calls that night or something like that, and then she's living on a farm, running the farm, and it's just like that woman has 4 jobs. What's going on here? What's the deal with this?
That's right. So true.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, so it's kind of disappointing that, you had this big moment on January 1st, and then January 6th, the entire world turned upside down. And we kind of forgot about COVID a little bit for about a month. And I think now that things are, I don't know, I guess the impeachment's still going on. So I guess we're still talking about that. But I think we're kind of slowly coming back to COVID. And so is there a next step? Or is that kind of are more businesses in Sandy opening?
Yeah. So first is we continue to support all these businesses, right? And so for a lot of these businesses, it was about us supporting businesses that were at the end of the rope. They had no other choice but to make this courageous decision to reopen against the governor's mandates. And so we've had several businesses that have opened. There's several in our community that have opened, and some that have gotten more attention than others. And there's a lot that have continued to open every day since. To your point, we weren't necessarily as out there after the events of January 6th for a variety of reasons. One is that you've got to read the temperature a little bit. I think as elected leaders and as leaders, and make sure that you're not contributing to anything that you might not want to be contributing to, especially at the kind of just the time we're at, in both here in Oregon and as a country. But yeah, so we have businesses that are opening. We're still very supportive of them. We have a legal defense fund that we started through the Freedom Foundation to help out any of these businesses. So far, some of them have been contacted by the governor's agencies, and they're going through that process. But it's been pretty smooth sailing, I would say, quite honestly. And so we continue to support these business owners that are looking at opening, and we'll be there for them for sure.
I wonder if there are any businesses being pushed underground through all this. I was half tempted. I mean, I'm not going to do this, but find a field somewhere, set up some tents, get a DJ, some kegs, charge admission, don't register anywhere, and then when OSHA shows up, just walk away.
Well, and what I would say, is
terrible.
Well, it's not so terrible because it's kind of happening.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, this is my thoughts, and I would never do something like that. But I'm like, I wonder if somebody's doing this.
So a couple of things on that. One is I'm learning. You know, I always kind of question why the 20s were so cool, and now I know. Right? There is nothing. I mean, there's very few things cooler than being in a speakeasy. And so those are happening everywhere. And I've partaken in some of those. And in fact, I've heard of different ones where you've got to, kind of knock on the back door and know a password and get in. And I said, you better believe I want to know about that, about that place. But it's funny you mentioned that, James, because that was in my conversation with the governor. Is I had mentioned to her, I mean, I'm not hiding. I'd mentioned to the governor that I'd been to a couple of these speakeasy type places.
Yeah.
And what I had reiterated to her is once you break that mandate, just to open your doors, all of a sudden nothing's off limits. So you're down to break whatever mandate you want. And what I told her, so now we have these businesses opening up everywhere underneath their own guidelines, whatever they see fit. And her decision really was, is I said, businesses are opening, which they are. They're opening today. They're opening tomorrow. Businesses are opening. The true leadership question is to the same one that I was faced with, several weeks ago, is what's the manner in which they're going to open, and what kind of leader do you want to be to put forward the guidelines for them to follow? Because it's just that first mandate that they break. That's the big one. Mm-hmm. After that, it becomes different. Now, for us, we had that leadership moment where we said, if you're going to be part of this coalition, this is the manner in which you're going to open. But that's why people need leadership right now, is to know, how to open and those kinds of things. But not much cooler than a speakeasy these days. I'll tell you that.
I need to find some of those. I've heard of them. I haven't.
We can thank Kate Brown for making speakeasy.
There you go.
Again. Yeah, got that one right.
There you go.
But I'd say, and honestly, the other side of that coin is not having businesses open, not having bars open. We've seen the data show super spreader events come from a number of people crowding indoors into somebody's house party and whatever. And there were, like a fraternity at the U of O, they had 200 cases or something like that because everybody's cramming in. And it's like, well, what the heck else are people going to do if they can't go out to restaurants and bars and movie theaters like normally? Of course you're just driving people towards these more contagious, more super spreader type events. And it's been said ad nauseum just on this episode, but for the party that's supposedly pro-science, that doesn't seem very scientific. Well,
there's a difference between being pro-science and pro-common sense, I think. I mean, I hate to say this, but I think everybody probably knew an individual in school that was extremely well-read. Mm-hmm. And you would say, well, that individual's really book smart, but not necessarily street smart. And, we need a little bit more street smarts, I think, right now in our government to be able to look, okay, what's practical? What actually makes sense here, And when you think about this last New Year's Eve that we had, I mean, there were, to your point, house parties galore. Mm-hmm. Now, is that better? Of people packing into homes that are not sanitized, most people not wearing masks and all those kinds of things, or going out to a place that is underneath the governor's guidelines that has sanitation, has face masks, and all of those kinds of things. A lot of this, to that point, it's do you want bringing people in for as someone who's active all the time, who's an elected, I have meetings. We're always trying to figure out how to meet, right? How to do this podcast, how to meet and have coffee or lunch, or all those things that we used to do. Now people are meeting in homes or doing different things when they used to be going to a sanitized place with social distancing, with wearing a mask, and just we need to get more practical. To James's point earlier, thinking of the totality, of these decisions and just common sense. That's the big thing.
So Kate Brown's got the book smart, and Stan Pulliam has the Main Street smart.
Well, I'm not going to discount my book smart either.
Stan Pulliam's got both. There it is.
There you go.
You heard it here, listeners.
I think this goes to a sort of left-wing versus right-wing mentality and how you view the government. And this is something that I, living in downtown Portland, have run into a lot with my left-wing friends, is they see and I think I've said it on this podcast before, but they see the relationship between government and the people as sort of a parent-child relationship. The parent tells you to do something, and you just do it because they're the parent. Whereas a right-wing mindset is more like you take into account other things, and is this going to be the benefit for me? And the government is not this all-knowing parent that has the absolute authority. They're just one of many things that you consider when you decide what to do. And Kate Brown and the people like her need to realize that not the entire state is not of this left-wing mindset that is just going to do whatever they're told regardless. And when you make these rules, you have to understand that some people are not going to follow the rules. And it's even just the same thing as like speeding. When you put up a speed limit, if you don't enforce it, if you don't enforce it every single time, people are going to break it. And so it's this total misunderstanding of the characterization of people, of human nature, that they think, if we put these restrictions in place, everyone's going to follow them.
Right.
And they're not. And that's exactly your point.
There's another clear thing too. You said a word there that's kind of become a little bit of a pet peeve for me, which is authority. Whose authority is it? When the first thing that the governor pushed back on in a public statement against me is that the mayor doesn't have the authority, to do this. And all I was doing was supporting our people, supporting our business owners. I had never claimed to have some kind of legal, authority. In fact, it was the first thing that I had pointed out to these business owners who wanted to open. But the authority, however, seemed to be very important to this governor, that it was her authority and her decision whether or not to do it. And something I had needed to remind her is that my authority, her authority, any elected leader's authority comes from the people. The people are our authority. And I think that's something that's really starting to get forgotten about in all of this too, is that we are elected public servants of the people. And so when we're making these decisions, too much of what I'm seeing right now, and I feel the frustration. I've been in public service less than others, but I see it. It's frustrating to have to always build compromise in our system. It's frustrating to have checks and balances in our system. It makes you be a better person. It makes you be a better visionary. It's good to have compromise. But what has happened I've noticed is too many politicians have seized on this emergency to be able to do what they want without checks and balances, without compromise. You think about the state legislature, and I don't care if you're a Republican state legislator or a Democrat state legislator, they are turning their backs on what their role is supposed to be in this entire thing. They're supposed to be the representative body of the people. There are elected representatives. Yeah. And yet through a wildfire season, through pandemic, through all these mandates, where are they? Where are they calling on the governor?
Abdicated their responsibility to the governor.
100%. And people expect results out of elected leaders these days. I think that's probably a new tide in, younger voters and stuff, is they're looking for results. And they're going to have to start showing a lot more results if they want to stay in office, quite frankly.
Well, we are just about out of time. So, Stan, one of the things that we like to ask our listeners before we leave is, who is your favorite Republican?
Yeah, so, I took notice that you guys like to do that. And so what I think I'd go local, and I think I would say Dennis Richardson. For a couple of reasons. Is like myself, Dennis was conservative, had a conservative viewpoint and outlook. But the way in which he carried himself, was one of openness and of listening to others and trying to find common ground and implement kind of this common sense that we're talking about. He's also someone who throughout his career was continually underestimated and always kind of, came through and surprised people. And I was one of them. I remember before he passed being able to share this with him. When he was elected as Secretary of State, I was like, ho-hum. Like, here we are, finally. We get a Republican statewide position to that darn Secretary of State's office in a non-redistricting year. Like, great, right? And look at what he stepped up and did just through his leadership and through what he did with the audits and that power and things that he exposed in the state. Just remarkable. And so, I would say it would have to be, especially looking at modern times, Dennis Richardson is someone, I think, a Republican in this state that we should all aspire to.
Good choice.
Well, here's to more Dennises.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that is about wraps us up. So, Stan, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rational Republican Podcast. Your hosts are James Ball and Nick Perlosky. The show today is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors of Portland, serving the greater Portland metro area for all your garage door installation and repair needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at james@jamesaball.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can find our episodes at jamesaball.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.